Hi there, we're back with another anatomy lesson, and today we're focusing on the pectorals. So it's funny because I always think about this one that I thought of the pectorals as just being the chest muscles, which they are the chest muscles, but I just thought about them going from like the center of the body to the outside of the torso. And now that I understand anatomy, I think about them totally differently, and they have a completely different significance for me in terms of when I'm drawing. In this image, which if you saw the tutorial on the deltoid, you will have already seen this. We've got the deltoid here, so if you remember that guy. And then the pectorals are this section here. Right like that, okay? So this is what we're talking about. We've got it over on the other side here, and then we have some skin kind of covering that, right? So here's what we need to know. We need to know the origin, which runs along the underneath of the scapula. Oh, the scapula. I am weird today. Okay, it runs along the underneath of the clavicle, down the sternum, and a little bit onto the ribs. It kind of cuts over onto the ribs just a little bit there, okay? And then all this stuff in here, these are the edges of the muscles. They're not actually attached at those points. There are some points underneath in here that are attached, but not those edges on the outside. And then we have the insertion point here on the humerus. So if you remember, the deltoid attaches about halfway down the humerus, but the pectorals attach a little bit higher than that, okay? I do want you to notice at this point, though, how this attachment point on the pectorals flows right into the attachment point on the deltoids, because that just shows up again and again when you're drawing the figure. It makes a really beautiful curve. It's just a really direct, like, link from one muscle to the other, and it's just really important to look at. It adds a lot of beauty when you're drawing. Now, the muscle fibers at this insertion point, right? This is a small insertion point, so the muscle fibers kind of fan out like this. And then we have from this large origin area, the fibers just point toward the insertion, right? So it's kind of like a shell, right? Like the kind of shell you find on a beach, not the twirly twisted one, kind of the flat one, like it'll have a pearl in it or something, I don't know. Now, just like the deltoid, it does have a bit of a division here. Okay, so we've got a division here, we've got another division down there, and I don't personally consider this to be a big deal to understand when studying the deltoid. I think if it helps you to understand that this is the division between the deltoid and the pectoral and not this, then that is helpful. But I don't think it's really super important to understand all the divisions in the pectoral. I'm fine with just thinking about it as one large muscle. Now, in this view over here, I wanted to show this because what they have done is they've removed the deltoid. So the deltoid would be attaching here, be attaching down here on the humerus, and it would go something like that and kind of cover up the end of that pectoral. They also have the humerus, just note, pointing this way. So it's like the arm is out sideways, and this is stretching that pectoral. Okay, so I'm going to actually outline these two shapes so that you can make a comparison between them when the arm is stretched out versus when it's down. Okay, so there's the stretched out shape. And there's the down shape. So you can see how this gets pulled in that direction, right? And this is actually when it's being stretched. It's not being used quite as much in this position. It's more like this muscle is used to take this humerus bone out this way and pull it in toward the body, right? But I mentioned at the beginning of the video that initially I kind of thought about it being the chest muscle. Like what this pectoral does, this is what I used to think, is it creates depth here visually, right? So like this is all raised up. And that's, why people end up having this roundness in their chest, besides breasts or fat or anything like that. Like the development of this muscle is what gives depth to the chest. But that's not really what I think about anymore when I think about the pectoral. Now what I think about is this little point right there. To me, that is just the most important part visually in terms of the function of the deltoid. It's the idea, and this is just kind of a theme whenever I talk about anatomy, it's the idea that it takes the torso, right? So the rib cage is in here like an egg. And then we've got the humerus down here, right? And it is attaching these two things. It's creating a link between the torso and the arm so that everything feels like it's woven together instead of feeling separated and like a stick is stuck on the side of the body. And with that, this direction of the edge here and here really tells you what is happening with the arm. So I think it's really important where you see that. Sometimes when the arm is really relaxed, you don't really see that angle. You might just see a line there at the armpit. But when you do see that line and that edge of the pectoral, it is really important to include it. It tells you if the arm is up, it tells you if the arm is forward, it tells you what is happening there, and it just creates this natural flow from one part of the body to another. So that is why it's really important. There's my humerus. At least I find it humerus. I'll just let this go off the edge. All right. So let's look at where we have our origin and insertion points. So underneath the scapula, and then we come down here onto the sternum, a little bit onto the rib cage, and then we're going to go over here. We're kind of toward the inside of the humerus now, right? So the deltoid was attaching out here on the outside, but we're going to be a little bit higher on the inside of the humerus. And let's start attaching, right? Go this way and that way. Let me get some red in here. And our muscle fibers are going to go that direction there. Oh, I messed up that part. Hold on. It's going to go this direction. And kind of circle back around. There we go. Okay. Now let's do something funky actually. On this side, let's go ahead and put our humerus up in the air this way. Okay. So now the arm is pointing up. What's going to be happening there? So again, we have our origin and insertion points here. And I'm saying this with the caveat that probably that clavicle would be moving a little bit if the arm was actually up in the air. And then we'll have, let's say right about here, our insertion point. Okay. So let's get a dark red this time. And we're going to connect up this way. Okay, so we'll have something a little more like this. Okay, so then you can see how that underneath line right here at the armpit and right there at the armpit is different depending on what is happening with that arm. So now that we have gone over the overall shape of the muscle and the origin and insertion points, let's go ahead and try to draw them on top of a skeleton. I've got colored pencils today so that I can sketch and shade a little bit on these muscles, and I have a piece of Duralar over the top of a printout of a skeleton that I am using to do my anatomical illustrations. I've already got the deltoids on there, so let's go ahead over there and get started. All right, let's sketch in our pectorals here on the skeleton. So we're going to start our insertion point a little bit away from that deltoid, so we need a little bit of a gap there. And we're going to run along the underneath of that clavicle. Then we're heading on to the sternum. We're going to go down the sternum a little bit and then just a little head over onto the ribs. And this is going to connect to a big flat tendon running down the abdominals. Okay, so here's our origin. I'm going to do that also over on this other side. Okay, and then our insertion point is tucked a little bit underneath this deltoid. So remember, we're attaching a little bit more on the inside of the humerus, and it's a little bit higher than the deltoid. So probably we're going to be starting here and going up around this way. The lower section is actually going to attach down a little bit higher, so it's kind of running this way. And then the upper section is pointing a little bit lower. So that upper section is going to run a little bit along this deltoid and point down toward the bottom. And it'll kind of come over like this. And then the middle section is going to point a little bit this way, and the lower section down here because it's going up that way. Okay, I'm going to slip a little piece of paper under here so that you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so here is basically what it looks like. This upper section actually connecting lower, and then the middle section, and then here. So it's kind of like a fan or like an oyster shell kind of a situation there. It's also what creates this kind of arch shape in this position at the bottom. It's the overlapping of those different directions. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to give a little bit of the muscle fibers, and then I'll shade it up. So we want to leave a little space for tendon at each side for where it's connecting to the bones. Now, a lot of times at this inside part, right where I'm shading, the muscle can still be really thin, so you can still see the ribs through it. But typically, once you get out to this part and that lower part, the muscle is going to obscure those ribs. Okay, and a little bit more shading with the black here. Remember to angle those fibers down here that they head upwards. These head down. These are a little horizontal, and these head up. All right, we'll get just a little bit of a pectoral over here, even though in this view it is mostly obscured. We'll bring it down a little bit onto those ribs. And it'll angle this way. We can't see the insertion point from this view, so I'm just going to start off with a little bit of shading. Okay, let's see what it looks like with the paper underneath. And there you go, the addition of the pectoral muscles. This video features highlights from a full drawing lesson, which can be found on patreon.com/School of Realist Art. There you will find extended lessons, multiple examples, reference photos, and other tutorials. Check out patreon.com/School of Realist Art.